The alarm in my chest goes off before the alarm on the wall does. I feel it in my ribs, a tightness that tells me something is wrong long before the sound reaches my ears. That is the first thing you learn as a soldier. Your body knows before your mind does. I am standing outside the private chamber of the Cathari Queen, my spear locked against my shoulder, my boots planted on stone that is older than every human city combined. I am the only human guard in the entire Hive Palace. Not one of 100, not one of 10, the only one. My name is Ethan Barrow, and 3 months ago I was told this posting was an honor. I have since learned that when someone tells you a posting is an honor, they usually mean nobody else wanted it. The Cathari are not small. The 2 guards standing across from me are each a head and a half taller than I am, their shoulders wide enough to block a doorway, their mandibles clicking together in a low rhythm that I have learned means irritation. They do not look at me. They have never looked at me, not once in 3 months, except to measure the distance between my throat and their claws, just in case. I do not blame them. Their empire and mine fought a war that neither side won and neither side lost. It ended not with a victory parade, but with a treaty nobody was happy to sign. And as a gesture of peace, 1 human guard was placed inside the Queen's own palace, standing at the door that guards nothing important, watching a hallway that nothing ever walks down. That is what they told me. Nothing ever happens here. Tonight, something happens. The ceremony inside the Great Hall has been going on for 6 hours. I know this because I have been standing at my post for 6 hours, listening to the low hum of 1,000 insect wings folding and unfolding in unison, a sound like rain on metal. The Cathari call it the Night of Long Names, a ceremony where every soldier who died in the war is spoken aloud, one, by rank, by hive, by name. It takes 6 hours because there were that many names. I am not permitted inside. I am permitted only here, in the hallway, standing guard over a door that leads to the Queen's private chamber, a chamber she has not entered once tonight because she has been seated on her throne the entire time, listening to every single name of every single soldier who did not come home. I have seen her from a distance many times. She is not what human paintings imagine when they draw an alien queen. She does not look cruel. She looks tired, in a way that a treaty cannot fix and a peace agreement cannot erase. I hear her voice on the address system that runs through the palace walls, calm and steady, reading name after name after name. Then, without warning, the voice stops in the middle of a syllable. Not the end of a sentence, not a name completed and moved to the next. It simply stops, mid-word, like a recording that has been switched off. The 2 guards beside me straighten instantly. Their spears come up. The clicking of their mandibles turns fast and sharp, a sound I have never heard from them before, and even without speaking their language fluently, I understand it perfectly. It is the sound of fear. Then the screaming starts. It comes from the Great Hall, not one voice but many, a wall of sound rushing down the corridor toward us, like water through a broken pipe. The guards beside me do not move toward it. They freeze, the way you freeze when the impossible happens in front of you, and your training has no answer for it. I do not freeze. I have never claimed to be brave. I have simply never been very good at standing still when something is wrong. I am running before I decide to run, my boots slapping against the stone floor, pushing past guards twice my size who do not even try to stop me, because stopping me has never crossed their minds. Why would it? I am the guard who stands at the door where nothing happens. The great hall doors are open, and what I see inside will stay with me for the rest of my life. The Queen of the Cathari Dominion, ruler of 11 star systems, a being that has sat on her throne for longer than human civilization has kept written records, is on the floor. Not sitting, not kneeling, on the floor, collapsed sideways off her throne, her long limbs folded at wrong angles, her ceremonial robes spread out around her like water. The court around her is in complete chaos. Advisors are shouting orders that contradict each other. Soldiers are pointing weapons at doorways, at each other, at the ceiling, at anything that might explain what just happened. Someone is screaming the word poison over and over, and the word spreads through the hall faster than any guard can contain it. I do not think about protocol. I do not think about the fact that I am the only human in a room full of a species that outnumbers me 1,000 to 1, all of them currently terrified and looking for someone to blame. I think about one thing only. She is on the ground, and no one is helping her. I reach her before anyone else does. This surprises exactly no one who has ever seen a human move compared to a Cathari noble who has spent centuries being carried rather than walking. Their bodies are built for strength and endurance in ways ours are not, but reflexes, quick reaction to sudden danger that has always belonged to us. I kneel beside her. Her breathing is shallow but present. Her eyes are closed, up close, without the ceremonial lighting, without the throne behind her making her seem larger than life. She looks smaller than I have ever seen her look. She looks like someone who has been carrying something heavy for a very long time and has just, finally, put it down. That is when I see it. Clutched in her hand, hidden almost entirely beneath the folds of her sleeve, is a small object. It is not Cathari made. I know this instantly, the way you know your own language from a stranger's. It is human-made, small enough to fit inside a closed fist, worn smooth at the edges like something that has been held many times before. I do not have time to study it. Footsteps are closing in around us, voices rising, someone shouting for the royal physicians, someone else shouting for the guards to seal every exit. In 3 seconds, 20 Cathari will be standing where I am kneeling, and whatever secret this object holds will become public property, picked apart by advisors who are already looking for someone to punish. I do not decide with my mind. I decide with something faster than my mind, the same place that got me running down that corridor before anyone else moved. I close my hand over hers, and when I pull back, the object is no longer in her palm. It is in mine, pressed flat against my side, hidden beneath my sleeve exactly the way it had been hidden beneath hers. I say nothing. There is no time to say anything, and even if there were, I do not yet know what I would say. The royal physicians arrive, a swarm of them, pushing me aside without ceremony, without thanks, without even acknowledging that I was the one who reached her first. I let them push me back. I do not resist. I stand at the edge of the chaos, my heart pounding harder than it has pounded in 3 months of standing at a door where nothing happens, and I watch them lift her carefully onto a stretcher of woven metal. Around me, the hall is a storm of accusation. I hear the word assassination. I hear the word sabotage. I hear, more than once, the word human, spoken with a weight that makes my stomach turn cold, because I understand exactly where this is going. There is one human in this palace. There is one human standing close enough to the queen when she fell. The mathematics of blame are not complicated, and they are already being solved by every frightened voice in this room. I should be afraid. Some part of me is afraid. But a larger part of me is thinking about the object pressed against my ribs, small and human-made and hidden, in the hand of a being who has never, in 10,000 years of recorded history, shown a single moment of weakness in public. I think about the way she looked on that floor. Not like a queen struck down by poison, not like a ruler betrayed by an enemy. I have seen that particular kind of collapse before, in a hospital corridor a long time ago, on my own mother's face, in the last week before she was gone. It was not weakness caused by an enemy. It was grief, finally too heavy to carry standing up. I do not know why the queen of an alien empire would be holding a human-made object while listening to the names of her own dead. I do not know what it means, or why it matters, or why some instinct in me decided, faster than thought, that this was not evidence to be handed over. But I know one thing with complete certainty: as the guards begin sealing the hall and the shouting turns toward finding someone, anyone, to answer for what has happened tonight. Whatever secret I am now holding against my side, I am the only one in this entire palace who has seen it. And I am the only one who has any idea what it might cost her if I let it go. 3 weeks earlier, before any of this happened, I was standing at the same door I always stand at, doing the same nothing I always do, when the door opened from the inside instead of from the outside for the first time in 3 months. No guard opens that door. No advisor opens that door. The Queen's private chamber is sealed to everyone except the Queen herself, and even the 2 soldier caste guards flanking me had never seen it open while she stood on the other side of it. It opened, and there she was, tall enough that she had to lower her head slightly to look at me directly, her eyes the deep amber color that Cathari eyes turn when they are studying something closely rather than simply looking at it. I did what training told me to do. I straightened, lowered my spear point toward the floor, and waited for an order. She did not give one. She studied me instead, the way you might study a locked door you had walked past every day for years without ever trying the handle. Then she spoke, and her common tongue was better than mine, precise in a way that made every word feel chosen rather than simply spoken. She asked me why I did not look at her the way the others did. I did not understand the question at first, and I told her so, because lying to a queen who can smell dishonesty in your sweat seemed like a poor way to begin a conversation neither of us had planned. She explained. Every guard who stands near her, Cathari or otherwise, looks at her one of 2 ways. Either they look at her the way you look at a monument, something to be admired from a careful distance, or they look at her the way you look at a weapon, something to be watched carefully in case it turns toward you. Nobody, she said, in 10,000 years of her reign had ever simply looked at her the way you look at a person having a difficult day. I told her the truth, because I could not think of anything else to say. I told her that after 6 months of war and 3 months of standing outside her door, I had stopped seeing a monument or a weapon a long time ago. I saw someone who worked longer hours than anyone else in this palace, who read reports until the lights in her chamber burned late into the night, who, more than once, I had heard through that very door, speaking softly to no one at all, the way a person speaks when they think no one can hear them. I expected her to be angry that I had overheard anything. Instead, something in her posture changed, a small release of tension along her shoulders that I had never seen before, not once, not even during the war negotiations I had watched from a distance. She invited me inside her chamber. This had never happened to any guard before, human or Cathari, and I understood, even as I stepped through that door, that I was walking into something that broke every rule the palace had ever written. Her chamber was smaller than I expected, and simpler. No golden ornaments, no ceremonial weapons mounted on walls, no trophies from a reign that had spanned longer than most human nations had existed. Instead, there were records, stacks of them, star charts and casualty reports and treaties, spread across a wide table exactly the way a tired officer's desk looks after a long campaign. She told me something that night that I have not repeated to a single living soul until this moment, and I am only telling it now because of what happened 3 weeks later in that great hall. Cathari society believes their queen cannot break. It is not simply tradition, it is law. A queen who shows weakness, who grieves openly, who is seen by her people to be anything less than eternal and unshaken, is considered unfit to rule under a law so old that nobody living remembers when it was written. The moment a queen is seen to break, the hive itself begins the process of selecting a successor, whether the current queen wishes it or not. It does not matter if she is capable. It does not matter if she is loved. The law does not ask for capability or love. It asks only for the appearance of unbreakable strength, and once that appearance cracks in front of witnesses, the crack cannot be repaired. She told me this while looking not at me, but at a small object on her desk, one she picked up and turned over slowly in her long fingers as she spoke. It was the same object I would later pull from her hand on the floor of the great hall. She told me it belonged to her creche sister, the closest thing the Cathari have to what humans would call a sibling, someone raised alongside her from the moment both of them hatched, someone who had stood beside her through every year of her reign until the war took her, in the same battle that ended the war itself in stalemate. Cathari soldiers do not fall the way human soldiers fall. Their species has no single word for the kind of loss she was describing, because their culture has never permitted itself to have one. Grief, real grief, The kind that stops you mid-sentence and leaves you unable to breathe properly for days, is something the Cathari consider a uniquely human weakness, spoken about only in old philosophical texts as a curiosity of our species, never something a Cathari, let alone a queen, could be expected to feel. She told me she had been hiding this feeling for 6 months. She told me she read every casualty report herself, every single name, because if she did not read them herself, she could not trust anyone else to have done it properly, and she read her creche sister's name in the very first report, and she had not permitted herself, not once, in 6 months, to react to it in front of anyone. I asked her, carefully, why she was telling me this. I was a human soldier from the very species her people had fought a war against. I was the least likely confidant in the entire star system. Her answer has stayed with me every day since. She said that was exactly why she trusted me. Every Cathari in this palace had a reason to want her strong. Her strength protected their positions, their families, their futures. I had no such stake in her strength. I gained nothing from her appearing unbreakable and lost nothing from her appearing human. I was, in her words, the only person in 10,000 years who could see her fall apart and have no reason at all to use it against her. I did not know what to say to that. I still do not, fully, even now. I told her only that where I come from, we have thousands of years of poetry written about exactly what she was describing, and that in my culture, hiding grief for 6 months was not considered strength. It was considered a slow kind of drowning. She asked me, quietly, how humans survive it, if not by hiding it. I told her the only way I knew. You let someone else carry it with you, even for a moment, even just one person, even in secret. You do not have to announce it to the world. You simply have to stop being the only one who knows. She was silent for a long time after that. Then she placed the small object back into a hidden fold of her robes, close enough to her chest that I understood, without her needing to explain further, that she carried it with her always, hidden from everyone, a small anchor to a grief her entire civilization had decided she was not permitted to have. Before I left that night, she made me promise one thing. She asked me never to speak of this conversation to anyone, Cathari or human, for as long as I served in this palace. She said if it became known that she had confided in a human guard, in secret, breaking 10,000 years of tradition, it would be seen by her own advisors as proof that something in her had already begun to fracture, and the succession process would begin regardless of whether she had ever shown weakness in public. I promised. I meant it. I have kept it every single day since, standing outside her door, saying nothing, watching nothing happen, exactly as I was assigned to do. Which is why, 3 weeks later, when I knelt beside her on the floor of the great hall and saw that same small object clutched in her open hand, I understood immediately what I was looking at. It was not evidence of poison. It was not evidence of sabotage. It was 6 months of carefully hidden grief, finally becoming too heavy for one person to carry standing up, in front of an entire court, on the one night every year when she was required to speak the name of every soldier who did not come home, including the one name she had never once allowed herself to react to out loud. I understood exactly what would happen if that object, and what it represented, became known to the wrong ears. And I understood, kneeling there with chaos exploding around me, that I was the only person in the entire palace who had any idea what was truly happening, and the only person who had any chance at all of stopping it from destroying her. The physicians carried her away on the woven metal stretcher, and the great hall did not calm down after she left. If anything, it grew louder, because now there was no queen present to silence the panic with her presence alone, and every advisor in the room seemed determined to be the one who figured out what had happened first. I stood near the edge of the crowd, doing my best to look like exactly what I was supposed to be, a guard from a species nobody in this room fully trusted, standing quietly at the edges while important people decided important things. It was not difficult to look unimportant. 3 months of standing outside a door where nothing happens had given me a great deal of practice. An older Cathari advisor, robes marked with the deep red sash of the Inquisitor caste, moved through the crowd with a stillness that made everyone else's panic look even more chaotic by comparison. His name was Draven, and I had only ever seen him twice before, both times from a distance, both times during formal proceedings where his presence alone was enough to make even senior guards straighten their posture. The Inquisitor caste exists for exactly one purpose. They are trained, from hatching, to detect dishonesty, not simply to notice nervous behavior the way a human interrogator might, but something closer to scent, a biological sensitivity to the subtle chemical changes a Cathari body produces when it is being deceptive. It is the reason Cathari courts have no need for lie detection technology. They have Draven, and others like him, walking among the frightened and the guilty alike, close enough to smell the difference. I did not know, that night, whether an Inquisitor's senses worked the same way on human biology as they did on Cathari biology. I suspected they did not, entirely, since our bodies produce different chemicals under stress. But I also suspected that whatever difference existed would not be large enough to save me if I stood in front of Draven and told an outright lie about what had happened on that floor. This was the first lesson I had learned about Cathari law during my 3 months in this palace, and it would matter more in the hours that followed than anything else I knew. A lie, under Cathari law, was defined narrowly and specifically. It was a spoken falsehood, a direct statement contradicted by fact. It was not the same as an omission. It was not the same as silence. It was not the same as a truth told in a way that led the listener toward a conclusion you had not directly stated. Cathari law, ancient and precise in the way only a law written by a species obsessed with exact language can be, drew a hard line between lying and simply not telling everything you knew. I understood, standing in that crowd, that this narrow distinction was the only tool I had, and I had perhaps minutes to decide how to use it before Draven's attention turned toward me. It did not take minutes. It took less than one. Draven crossed the hall directly toward me, his pace unhurried, the way a predator moves when it already knows exactly where its prey is standing and feels no need to rush. The murmuring crowd parted around him without being asked to, and by the time he stopped in front of me, silence had spread outward in a circle several paces wide, everyone nearby straining to listen without appearing to. He asked me a simple question first. He asked how close I had been standing when the Queen collapsed. I told him the truth. I told him I had been at my post outside the private chamber, at the far end of the corridor, and that I had run toward the hall the moment I heard the alarm inside my own body respond to the sound of the Queen's voice stopping mid-sentence. This was true. Every word of it was true. I had simply chosen which true things to say, and in what order, and I had left out entirely what I found in her hand once I reached her. Draven studied me for a long moment. I felt, rather than saw, several other advisors drifting closer, drawn by the silence around us, the way anything drifts toward the center of attention in a room full of frightened people looking for someone else to blame. He asked me next whether I had touched the Queen. This question was more dangerous, because the true answer, spoken carelessly, could lead directly toward the object I now carried hidden beneath my sleeve. I chose my words the way you choose footing on unstable ground, testing each one before placing my full weight on it. I told him I had reached her before the physicians arrived, and that I had checked whether she was breathing, because in that moment, with an entire court screaming the word poison, I judged that confirming she was alive mattered more than waiting for permission to approach her. Every word of this, too, was true. I did check her breathing. That is exactly what I told him I did. I did not mention what else my hand had done in those same few seconds, because he had not asked me that question directly, and Cathari law, precise and narrow as it was, did not require me to volunteer information nobody had specifically requested. I felt the weight of that distinction pressing against my chest as I spoke, the way a soldier feels the weight of a blade balanced against their palm, aware at every moment of exactly how easily it could turn and cut the hand holding it. Draven's eyes, a deep amber shade like the Queen's but colder somehow, more clinical, studied my face for a long moment. I do not know what he was searching for. I do not know what chemical signals my body was producing, whether fear or focus or the particular strain of carrying a secret while telling the truth around its edges. Whatever he found, or did not find, he did not immediately declare me guilty of anything, and in a room already boiling over with accusation, that alone felt like a small victory. He asked one final question before he moved on to question others nearby. He asked whether I had noticed anything unusual about the Queen in the moments before she collapsed, anything at all, no matter how small. This was the question I had been dreading since the moment he approached me, because it was broad enough to catch almost anything I might say, and narrow enough that a careful listener could hear exactly what I chose not to include. I told him the truth again, chosen carefully. I told him she had seemed, throughout the entire ceremony, exactly as composed and steady as she always did during official proceedings, and that nothing about her posture or her voice had suggested any physical distress until the moment her voice stopped entirely. This, too, was completely true. She had seemed composed throughout the ceremony. I had watched her from the hallway on the small viewing screen mounted near my post, and nothing about her had suggested weakness. Not once. Not for 6 hours. Right up until the exact moment it happened. What I did not say was what I had learned 3 weeks earlier, in her private chamber, about exactly what composure was costing her, and exactly what she had been carrying, hidden, through every one of those 6 hours. Draven turned from me eventually, moving on to question a cluster of nervous advisors standing near the throne, and I felt the tightness in my chest ease slightly, though not entirely, because I understood that this was only the first question in what would certainly become a much longer investigation. I used the small gap in attention to move quietly toward the edge of the hall, toward a service corridor I had learned about during my 3 months of otherwise uneventful patrols, a corridor built for palace staff rather than for guards or nobility, narrow and unremarkable, and most importantly, empty. I needed somewhere private to think, and more than that, I needed somewhere private to examine what I was holding, because I realized, standing in that chaotic hall, that I did not fully understand what I was protecting. I understood the shape of it, I understood the feeling behind it, but I had not yet looked closely at the object itself, since the moment I closed my hand over hers. In the quiet of the service corridor, with the noise of the great hall reduced to a distant hum through thick stone walls, I finally allowed myself to open my hand and look properly at what I had taken. It was small enough to sit entirely within my palm, worn smooth along every edge in the particular way objects become smooth only after years of being touched by the same fingers, over and over, in private moments nobody else witnesses. It was not Cathari-made. I had known that instantly in the Great Hall, and now, examining it closely, I understood something else as well. It was human-made but old, decades old by the style of its construction, the kind of small keepsake a soldier might carry from a war long before this one, the kind of object passed from one person to another as a promise, or a memory, or both. I did not understand, standing there in that narrow corridor, how a Cathari queen had come to possess something so distinctly and specifically human. I understood only that this object, whatever its origin, connected directly to the Kresh sister she had told me about 3 weeks earlier, and that whatever story explained how it came into her possession was a story with far more depth than I had first assumed. I closed my hand around it again and pressed it back beneath my sleeve, close against my ribs, and allowed myself exactly 1 moment, alone in that quiet corridor, to feel the full weight of what I had chosen to do the moment I closed my hand over hers on the floor of the Great Hall. I had not simply protected a secret. I had inserted myself directly into the center of a crisis that could reshape the future of an entire empire, and I had done it with almost no information about what I was truly protecting, guided by nothing more than the memory of a conversation 3 weeks earlier and an instinct I could not fully explain even to myself. Somewhere beyond these walls, in a private chamber I was not permitted to enter, the Queen of the Cathari Dominion was lying unconscious, unaware that the one piece of evidence capable of destroying everything she had spent 6 months hiding was no longer where it had fallen, and was instead resting quietly, safely, against the ribs of the one guard in her entire palace who understood exactly what it meant. I did not know, standing in that corridor, whether I had just saved her, or whether I had simply delayed the moment everything fell apart. I knew only that Draven's investigation would not stop at one round of careful questions, and that whatever time I had bought her with my silence would not last long enough on its own. I needed a plan, and I had perhaps a single day to build one, before the Inquisitor caste turned its full attention back toward the only human standing close enough to the Queen when she fell. The palace did not sleep that night. I moved through corridors that should have been quiet at that hour, and found instead clusters of advisors whispering in doorways, soldier caste guards doubled at every major junction, and messengers moving faster than protocol usually allowed, carrying word of the collapse to every corner of the Hive Palace and, I suspected, well beyond it. I returned to my post outside the private chamber, because that was where I was assigned to be, and because standing anywhere else, especially anywhere near the medical wing where she was being treated, would draw exactly the kind of attention I could not afford. I stood there for hours, spear locked against my shoulder, doing what I had done for 3 months, standing guard at a door where nothing happens, except now everything that mattered was happening everywhere except behind that particular door. News reached me the way news always reaches guards, in fragments carried by other guards passing on their rounds. The Queen was alive. The Queen was stable. The Queen had not woken. The royal physicians could find no trace of poison, no trace of any weapon, no evidence at all of an outside attack. This should have calmed the palace. Instead, it seemed to make the advisors more frightened, not less, because an unexplained collapse with no external cause left open only one possibility that Cathari law and Cathari culture had never permitted itself to consider seriously. That something inside her had simply broken on its own, without an enemy to blame. I understood, listening to these fragments pass from guard to guard down the corridor, that the danger to her had not lessened at all. If anything, it had grown sharper. A poisoning has a villain, and villains can be hunted and punished, and used to prove that the Queen herself remains blameless, a victim of outside treachery, rather than a ruler whose own body had failed the ancient standard her law demanded of her. An unexplained collapse with no villain to blame left only the Queen herself standing in the space where a villain should have been. I understood something else too, standing there through the long hours of that night. I could not simply continue saying nothing forever. Silence had bought me the first few hours, but Draven was not a being who forgot a conversation, and I had no doubt he would return to question me again, more carefully this time, once the shock of the collapse had settled and the Inquisitor caste began its true investigation, rather than its first frightened scramble for answers. I needed something more than silence. I needed a story that was entirely true in every word, and that led every listener toward a conclusion that was not the truth, without ever once requiring me to state a falsehood Draven could smell on my skin. It came to me near dawn, standing at that same door, thinking about the one advantage I possessed, that no Cathari advisor in this entire palace could claim. I was human. I was the only human in the building. And humans, as far as Cathari medicine was concerned, remained something of a mystery, our biology studied only briefly during the short years of contact between our two species, our diseases and conditions catalogued nowhere near as thoroughly as their own. If a Cathari collapsed with no external cause, the only explanation their law and culture permitted was catastrophic and unacceptable. But if a human were involved, even peripherally, even simply by proximity, an entirely new category of explanation became available, one that Cathari medicine had no established authority to rule out, because Cathari medicine had almost no experience with human biology at all. By the time the sun, or whatever passed for morning light through the high windows of the Hive Palace, began to touch the corridor floor, I had built the shape of a plan sturdy enough to stand on, though not sturdy enough, I knew, to hold forever. Draven found me again shortly after morning bells, exactly as I expected he would, this time without the chaos of the great hall around us, just the two of us standing in the quiet corridor outside the private chamber, which made the conversation feel considerably more dangerous than the first one had. He asked me directly this time, without the careful circling he had used the night before, whether I believed the Queen's collapse had anything to do with my presence in the palace. This was the opening I had been waiting for, and I answered it the only way I could, with something entirely true stated in a way that would carry him toward exactly the wrong conclusion. I told him that in the weeks since my arrival in the Hive Palace, I had noticed, on several occasions, that close proximity between myself and Cathari nobility produced mild physical reactions in them that their own physicians had not previously documented. I told him this was, as far as I understood human medical history, not unheard of. Human bodies carry a wide range of microorganisms that our own immune systems have adapted to over thousands of years without ever causing us harm. Organisms that other species, with no prior exposure, sometimes respond to in unpredictable ways. Every single word of this was true. I had, in fact, noticed exactly this, though only in the mildest and most forgettable way. A soldier cast guard developing a minor skin irritation after several weeks standing close to me during rotations. Nothing more serious than that. Nothing that any physician had considered worth investigating further at the time. I did not say that this minor irritation had anything to do with the Queen's collapse. I did not need to say it directly. I simply placed the true fact of my presence, and the true fact of a documented if minor reaction in another Cathari, directly beside the true fact of the Queen's sudden and unexplained collapse, and allowed Draven's own mind, already searching desperately for any explanation that did not require confronting the unthinkable, to draw the connection I had not spoken aloud. I watched his expression change as he considered this. I could not read Cathari faces with the precision a Cathari could read mine, but I had spent 3 months studying the small movements available to me, and I recognized in his posture something that was not quite belief, but was close enough to belief to matter. It was the recognition of a possibility his own investigation had not yet considered, a possibility that offered his frightened court an explanation involving mystery rather than catastrophe, an unknown human ailment rather than an ancient queen whose body had simply, finally, broken under a weight her law forbade her from ever admitting to carrying. He asked me, carefully, whether I believed I could identify and treat whatever condition I was describing. This was the question my entire plan depended on, and I answered it with the only tool I had left. Complete honesty, stretched as far across uncertain ground as it could possibly reach without snapping. I told him I could not be certain because human medicine and Cathari medicine had never been thoroughly compared in this specific way, but that given time, and given access to observe the Queen's recovery directly, I believed I could help determine whether this explanation held merit, and if it did, I could help ensure nothing similar happened again. I did not promise a cure. I did not promise an explanation. I promised only time, framed as medical necessity, and I watched Draven weigh this offer against the alternative his own investigation was rapidly running out of other paths toward. He did not fully believe me. I want to be honest about that, because pretending otherwise would dishonor exactly how dangerous those minutes were. I could see, in the careful distance he kept, and the measured way he chose his next words, that he suspected there was more to my account than I was sharing. But suspicion, under Cathari law, is not the same as proof, and an inquisitor as precise and careful as Draven would not act on suspicion alone when an alternative explanation, however unlikely, existed and required time to properly investigate. He granted me exactly what my plan required, though he did not know he was granting me anything at all beyond simple permission. He agreed to delay the formal tribunal proceedings against me by 1 full Cathari day, citing the need to properly investigate the medical possibility I had raised before pursuing any accusation that could not later be undone. 1 day. It was not much. But 1 day was exactly the amount of time the royal physicians had already estimated the Queen would need before she was likely to wake, and I understood, walking away from that conversation with my pulse finally slowing for the first time since the Great Hall, that I had bought her the single thing she needed most in this entire crisis. Time enough to wake, recover her composure, and return to her court exactly as she had left it, before anyone beyond the two of us ever learned what had truly happened. I spent that day in a strange kind of limbo, standing my post, as though nothing unusual had occurred, while beneath the surface of my composure, I turned Draven's suspicion over and over in my mind, aware that even a full day of delay would not survive if the Queen did not wake, or if she woke and could not present herself with the unshaken strength her law demanded of her. Word reached me late that same day, carried again through the fragmented network of guards passing news down the corridor the way water passes through a chain of connected pools. The Queen had opened her eyes. The Queen had spoken. The Queen had asked, according to the physician who first reported it, whether the night of long names had been completed in her absence, whether every name had still been spoken aloud despite her collapse. I do not know why this particular detail struck me as hard as it did, standing at my post with the news passing through me like a current. Even unconscious, even having just broken under a weight her own culture forbade her from ever setting down, her first waking thought had not been for herself. It had been for the soldiers, whose names she had been reading, making certain that even her own collapse had not caused a single one of them to go unspoken. I understood, in that moment, standing outside a door that had finally, truly, become the door where something happened, that whatever I had risked over the past day had been worth risking. Not because I fully understood the empire I was now tangled inside the edges of, and not because I expected any reward for what I had done. Simply because I had seen, 3 weeks earlier in that quiet chamber, exactly what she was carrying, and I had understood, kneeling beside her on that floor, that no one, Cathari or human, queen or soldier, should be forced to carry something that heavy entirely alone. The tribunal Draven had delayed did not need to be delayed a second time, but I did not yet know that, standing at my post as evening fell over the Hive Palace, waiting to learn whether the single day I had bought her would be enough, or whether I would soon be standing in front of an inquisitor with far less patience for medical mysteries than Draven had shown me the first time. The second day passed slower than any day I had ever stood at that post, 3 months of uneventful patrols suddenly feeling like a different lifetime compared to the tension coiled through every hour of waiting. Guards spoke in low voices when they thought I could not hear them, and though my grasp of their language remained imperfect, I understood enough to know the palace had not settled. It had simply gone quiet, the way a storm goes quiet in its center, not because the danger has passed, but because everyone inside it is holding their breath. Word came near the end of that second day that the Queen intended to return to formal court the following morning. I felt something in my chest loosen slightly at the news, though I did not yet allow myself to believe the danger had passed. A queen returning to court after a public collapse would face the sharpest scrutiny of her entire reign in that first appearance. Every advisor and every soldier and every inquisitor watching her with an intensity they had never before dared to direct at her, searching for any trace of the crack that had shown itself on the floor of the great hall. I stood at my post that final night, turning over every possible way this could still go wrong. If she appeared even slightly less composed than her law demanded, the succession process Draven had spoken of would begin regardless of any medical explanation I had offered, regardless of the day I had bought her, regardless of anything either of us had done. My careful truths from the day before had purchased time. They had not purchased certainty. Morning came, and the great hall filled faster and more completely than I had seen it fill even during the 6-hour ceremony that had started all of this. Every advisor stood in their formal position. Every soldier cast guard stood at rigid attention along every wall, and Draven stood near the front, close enough to the throne that I understood immediately he intended to watch her more closely during this appearance than he had watched anyone in his entire career. I was permitted inside the hall this time, standing not at my usual post outside her private chamber, but along the side wall with the other guards assigned to observe the proceedings directly, a small change in placement that I suspected was not an accident, though I did not yet understand why it had been made. She entered from the private passage behind the throne, and the entire hall fell silent in a way I had never heard it fall silent before, not even during the reading of names 2 nights earlier. Every eye in that room, human and Cathari alike, watched her walk the short distance to her throne, searching, I had no doubt, for any hint of unsteadiness, any trace of the weight she had been forced to set down so publicly. She did not falter. Her stride was measured, her posture exactly as composed as it had been through 6 hours of the night of long names, her expression giving away nothing at all to the hundreds of careful eyes fixed on her. She seated herself on the throne, with the same unhurried authority she had carried into that room 10,000 times before, and for a long, suspended moment, the entire hall seemed to be waiting for permission to breathe again. She gave a short address, brief by the standards of Cathari court, explaining only that she had experienced an unexpected medical episode, currently under investigation, and that she had every confidence it would be fully understood and resolved without further incident. She did not mention grief. She did not mention her creche sister. She did not mention a small human-made object hidden beneath her sleeve. She spoke of the matter the way any ruler speaks of a temporary weakness they intend to overcome, brief, controlled, and closed to further discussion. I watched Draven throughout her short address, and I saw something in his posture ease slightly, the careful stillness of active suspicion softening into something closer to satisfaction. Whatever he had expected to see in her that morning, whatever crack he had come prepared to find, he did not find it, and I understood, watching him, that the danger I had spent the last 2 days working to hold back had, for now, receded. It was near the very end of the proceedings, as the court began the slow process of dispersing back into the daily business of an empire that had briefly held its breath, that her eyes found mine across the width of the great hall. It lasted less than 2 seconds. To anyone else watching, it would have appeared as nothing more than a queen's gaze passing briefly over one guard among dozens standing along the wall. But in that half-second, something passed between us that neither of us needed to speak aloud. I saw, in the depth of her amber eyes, an acknowledgement of exactly what I had done, exactly what I had risked, and exactly what it had cost me to stand in front of an inquisitor and offer careful truths instead of the whole truth, all without her ever having asked me to. Then her gaze moved on, exactly as a queen's gaze is expected to move on, and the moment closed as quickly as it had opened. I did not see her again privately for 3 more days. The palace slowly returned to its ordinary rhythm, advisors resuming their ordinary disputes, guards resuming their ordinary rotations, the entire hive palace settling back into the routine hum it had carried before the night of long names turned everything briefly upside down. I returned to my post outside her private chamber, standing guard once again over a door where, officially, nothing happened. On the 4th evening, the door opened from the inside, exactly as it had 3 weeks before all of this began. She stood in the doorway, taller than I ever stopped noticing she was, studying me the way she had studied me the very first time, except now there was something different in the way she looked at me, something that had not been there before that first conversation in her chamber. She asked me why I had done it, not what I had done, because we both understood exactly what had happened without needing to name it aloud. She asked why. Why a human soldier, from the very species her own hive had fought to a bitter and unresolved standstill, had chosen to protect the one secret capable of ending her reign, rather than exposing it, rather than using it, rather than simply staying silent out of self-preservation the way anyone in that chaotic hall would have understood and forgiven. I told her the truth, because there was no longer any careful arrangement of words needed between the two of us, no inquisitor standing close enough to require caution, nothing but an honest question deserving an honest answer. I told her I had buried someone too, not a creche sister, because humans do not have such a bond, but someone close enough that the shape of the grief was not so different, and I told her that in my experience, no one, no soldier, no ruler, no ordinary person walking through an ordinary life should be required to hold an empire together in the very same week they are quietly falling apart inside. I told her that where I come from, we understand that strength and grief are not opposites. Sometimes the strongest thing a person can do is admit, to even one other living being, that they are struggling, rather than carrying that weight entirely alone until it breaks them in public, on a floor, in front of everyone who depends on them. She was quiet for a long moment after I finished speaking. Then she said something I had not expected and have not forgotten since. She said that in 10,000 years of Cathari history, no advisor, no physician, no member of her own hive had ever offered her that particular idea, that grief carried in secret with one trusted witness might be a form of strength rather than a failure to be punished under ancient law. She did not reward me publicly. I understood, even before she explained it, why that would have been impossible. A public reward would raise exactly the questions neither of us could afford, drawing attention toward precisely the connection between us that had to remain hidden if her reign was to continue undisturbed. Instead, she made a small, quiet change, one that appeared in the palace duty rosters the following morning, without any announcement or ceremony at all. My post was moved, no longer outside her private chamber, watching a door where nothing happens from a careful distance. Inside it, standing close enough that if anything like that night ever happened again, I would be the very first person to reach her, exactly as I had been the first time, except now, by her own quiet decision rather than by accident. I do not know what the years ahead will hold, for her reign, for the fragile peace between our two civilizations, or for whatever strange, unlikely trust has grown quietly between a Cathari queen and the one human guard who happened to be standing close enough, 3 weeks before any of this began, to notice that even a monument gets tired sometimes. I know only this. Somewhere in this vast palace, in a hive that has ruled 11 star systems for 10,000 years, under a law that permits no ruler to ever be seen as anything less than unbreakable, there are now 2 people who understand a very different truth. That a queen is allowed to be human, even without being one. And one of us, against every possible odd the galaxy could have arranged, actually is.